Welcome, everybody. My name's Gary Fortney, and this is The Trend. Well, after months of preparation, this is our first broadcast of the Trend podcast. So welcome everybody here. We're hopefully going to talk about very interesting things for the listening public and have some very spirited discussions about different trends that are taking place. The Trend's going to talk about several different topics. The first will be true crime. The true crime aspect of the Trend is going to be discussing current cases that are active, cases that are no longer active, cold cases, all aspects of true crime. The next part we're talking about is trends in law enforcement. We'll talk about our backgrounds a little bit because we're going to be tailored a lot towards the law enforcement aspect of the Trend podcast. And the trends in law enforcement are always changing, evolving, or basically never stay the same. So we're going to talk about that too. And then the last part, we're going to talk about the regional aspects, the region in general, what's going on with our different areas here. We'll talk about the economy. We'll talk about trends that happen within the public environment. So that's going to be the three main topics. All of our episodes will be posted online. I'll give you our website. It's www.trendmediallc.com. And our email is thetrend@trendmediallc.com. So we hope we'll get input from the public. We hope we get input from various people about basics of our topics we talk about, reviews, and also maybe topic suggestions for the future. So we're going to go around and introduce everybody who made this work for us, and we're going to do the introductions of everybody involved with the Trend podcast. First, I'm going to introduce Sarah Streifler. Sarah is vice president and executive producer, and I want Sarah to talk a little bit about her background, how she got involved in interest in law enforcement, and educational goals, and then final career goals. Sarah, you want to go ahead and kick it off?
Sure. I'm Sarah Streifler. I have a background as a criminal justice student. I have always kind of been interested in it since I was younger. My sister always put on murder shows on the TV, and it was just fascinating. I was always interested in the why behind why people did it, and I've always wanted to help people. I graduated from STLCC with my associate's degree in general transfer studies, and I took a criminal justice class, and that's where I met you. You guys offered me an internship with Vista Law Enforcement Training and Consulting, LLC. And so I did that for a while and got some good training in, a lot of certificates. And then you guys offered me a position as your business coordinator. So I've been working behind the scenes on administrative duties since then. And then Gary called me up in November and said he was going to start a podcast and asked me to be a producer on it. Since then, I've worked on the website, social media, a lot of background stuff as we're starting up, researching a little bit for some of the cases and working on creative aspects of production and distribution.
Excellent. Well, what's your current career goals? What do you ultimately want to do within yourself?
I ultimately want to end up being in the FBI. I've always wanted to be an FBI agent, but I don't know. I think I might go more intelligence.
FBI does have intelligence units and stuff, as well as other law enforcement agencies or federal. So yeah, good goal there. So you found out about this through a phone call from me, right?
Yes.
And I asked you to be part of it, which you agreed to do. And then second of all, you agreed to be an intern for Vista Law Enforcement Training Consulting, LLC, which I will talk about here a little bit, how that came to being. I'll be through my business partner, Brian Hilke. And so you're going to be involved in the podcast and the behind the scenes production. You're going to be picking topics, and it'll be coordinating topics as the executive producer. Excellent. Okay, next we're going to go to Allie Vogt. It's really Allison, but she goes by Allie, right? Allie is a vice president and producer of the Trend podcast. So Allie's going to talk a little bit about her background, how she got into the interest of law enforcement, her education, and her ultimate career goals. Take it away, Allie.
Yeah, thanks, Gary. So back in May of 2023, I graduated from high school and I earned my associate's degree from STLCC simultaneously. And it was at STLCC that I met Gary. I took a class with him, and I took it as an elective. I took his criminal investigation class, and I fell in love with it. I never thought that'd be something that I was interested in, and it really resonated with me, and I decided that's where I wanted to go. And so then after STLCC, I moved on to SLU. I graduated this past December with a degree in criminology and criminal justice, and there I was in the Honor Society for Criminal Justice Students. I'm about to begin my master's degree at Webster University. I'm going to be studying national security studies, so I'm really excited for that. I got to do that same internship that Sarah was involved in. I did it did it a semester before she did, but it really taught me a lot, and it really let me find where I wanted to be within law enforcement. And specifically where I want to be, I did an internship in the summer of 2024 with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. And I think that's where I want to apply once I'm finished with my master's degree. And that's really federal law enforcement is what really piqued my interest when I was learning from Gary. And so that's what I want to pursue.
Well, Brian and I hired you to work for Vista, right?
Yeah.
What's
yeah.
your position at Vista right now? What is your main focus of the working at Vista?
I am one of the internship coordinators. I work alongside Sam and Larry, and we coordinate the internship program. And I mainly focus on a lot of the scheduling and a lot of the personnel stuff, communication, and that's really where my focus is.
Excellent. So, how'd you get involved in the Trend podcast? How did that happen?
I got a call from you. You asked if I wanted to be a producer, and I said, "Hey, I'm down to try anything." And so this is really a fun experience. I'm happy to be here.
First episode, right?
First episode.
Anybody nervous? It's okay. We're doing this for the first time, okay? But anyway, so we're off to a really good start. Everybody's to really talk about their backgrounds. Next, we're going to go to Larry Boyd. Larry's going to talk about himself a little bit, about same career goals, which I think he's achieved already. And he's going to also talk about his educational goals. And Larry's going to go ahead and talk about himself, and he's going to talk about his position with the Trend.
So my background is I was in the military for 9.5 years, electronics warfare and intelligence, electronic countermeasures.
Which branch?
United States Navy, the branch. I served on ships, not boats. My professional life started a company in 1983 that we provide IT critical electrical infrastructure support for computers, because if the infrastructure isn't right, the computers won't work right. So then I decided that I need to increase my education. I went to UMSL while I was raising a family and also working full time, about 24 hours short of my bachelor's degree. So then children took a turn as we're growing our family, put my educational goals on the back burner. And then as I'm unwinding my business, I wanted to continue my education. I'm a curious by nature. My background in electrical industry is in engineering side. So the fun part of that is, how do things break? How do we run it to ground to make sure they don't break again or as frequently? And that led me to criminal justice, because bad people are out there, and I'm curious on how they are investigated, how the judicial system works. My first professor was Ruth Eilerman. She recommended I take courses with Gary, and I met Gary at Wildwood in the spring of 2023, same course that Allie was in and Sam was in. And he reached out and taking volunteers to be interns for Vista. So I asked the question, like, would I be eligible? Because I'm a non-traditional student. I'm 76 years old. And he said, sure. So I did. And then a little bit later, Gary hired me as one of the intern coordinators and also kind of a mentoring and also doing administrative duties. Most recently, he reached out to me in a phone call for Trend Media LLC to become a research specialist, which is kind of exciting for me because, again, having engineering background and running a business for 40 years, always working at trends, learning new ways to develop projects. And my years in ice hockey was learning new ways to coach kids. So I'm kind of excited to be here.
Yeah, as you said, Larry, you're basically a non-traditional student, but you're doing this and involved in your education to learn more. What about interacting with the younger generation? What have you learned in that?
That is interesting. I'm learning a lot because there is, I guess it's like 3 decades between some of us, 2.5 at least. So the interesting part for me is how they learn, how they communicate, and what motivates them. That's important.
One thing about the class, when I first met Larry, I walk into the classroom, and again, I'll talk a little bit about my background at the very end. And I saw traditional college students in their late teens or early 20s. And then I saw Larry. And the non-traditional aspect was he's a little bit older than the other students in the class. And one thing I found out about Larry, he was a big support for me because things that were discussed in the class that the younger generation wasn't familiar with, Larry supported me. He was able to discuss topics that the younger generation wasn't too familiar with. And I really took a liking to Larry. We had a lot of discussions, and I took very much interest in Larry's background. So about how he became a student, his previous military service. And Larry owns his own company. He's owned his own company for many years. He's president. And it's a basically, I would say, an engineering firm for computers and such. But anyways, I appreciate Larry being part of it. And he's a research specialist, and he'll be doing research for all of our issues. So anyways, next we're going to go to Tony P. Warchek. Tony talk about his background. Tony also works for Vista Law Enforcement Training Consulting. Tony's going to talk about his background a little bit and how he got involved with Vista, and then what his position will be here at the Trend. So Tony, if you want to go ahead and start a little bit here and let's talk about your background a little bit.
Good morning, Gary, and thank you. My name, as Gary said, is Tony P. Warchek, affectionately known by many as Igloo, which is a story that we'll cover later on. I began my career and education at the Rockhurst University in Kansas City. I went to Rockhurst for law and along the way transferred over to criminal justice. During my 3 years there, I worked an internship with Kansas City, Missouri Police Department, and it really expanded my horizons as to all the different aspects within local law enforcement. So while I was in college, I had applied for St. Louis County Police Department, Kansas City, Missouri Police Department. And being out of town in Kansas City, the St. Louis County Police Department moved faster on my background, and I wanted to return home. So I got hired in 1982 by the St. Louis County Police Department. Spent 3.5 years on the street, 1.5 years in narcotics, during which time kind of got exposed to the federal law enforcement side, something outside of the local law enforcement, and it piqued my interest. During that time, I started to do a little research on the different federal law enforcement agencies that there were, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, at the time just plain ATF, piqued my interest in the area of firearms and a little kind of a misnomer, their areas of expertise in arson and explosive investigations. So I took a test, held my score for a while until ATF hired. So ATF became a special agent in 1987, went to Cape Girardeau, Missouri for a little over 5 years, at which time I did everything as a new agent, from undercover to working fire scenes, bombing scenes. We had Southern Illinois and Southeast Missouri. So the federal crimes ran the gamut down there, and there wasn't a lot of federal law enforcement presence. So we became involved with a lot of different avenues of federal law enforcement, as well as dealing with all state and local agencies. 1992, they say ATF screwed up, and they moved me back to St. Louis, which is my home. I grew up in North City, North County. My wife is from the Hill. So we moved back here in 1992, and I never left. So my position with ATF took me travels around the world. I'm very fortunate to have had great experiences with ATF. So my first 5 years were with St. Louis County PD. My next 31 years were with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives. I'm very grateful for that time. I worked all ATF jurisdictions. The only thing I have not worked was a still, they are currently out there.
Still meaning alcohol producing still.
So the first years in St. Louis were great. OCDF work, Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force. Worked with some great friends at St. Louis Metro PD, many friends at St. Louis Metro PD. A great shout out to those men and women who serve in a challenging area, as well as St. Louis County PD, on the areas they patrol and the citizens and the problems they deal with. So I never lost touch with my local law enforcement friends, state and local. And to this day, I continue that friendship with many of them and hold that dear. One of those friendships was with Gary and Michelle. My wife worked for the Drug Enforcement Administration in the area of asset forfeiture, and both our careers paths crossed with Gary and Michelle's over many years. And we maintained that friendship. During my last 20 years with ATF, I was a certified explosive specialist, became that in 1997, and then became a certified fire investigator in 2000. And I joined our national response team in 1997. So that was my last 20 years. We're focused on the origin and cause of explosions and fires.
Let me build on that real quick a second with Tony. Our second episode is going to deal with law enforcement, and Tony's getting into his background about what he did, some of the major cases he worked on, talk about where he's been, what he has seen, and a couple of those are very noteworthy cases that happen around the country. And Tony's going to talk about that in our second episode. You'll have to listen in to get a little bit more of his background, which will be very interesting backgrounds. Go ahead, Tony. Just wanted to kind of cover that a little bit.
After I retired, Gary asked me to become involved with his company, Vista Law Enforcement Training and Consulting. I started doing role play. I enjoyed that, de-escalation and other scenarios. And that led into, I have an extensive background as an instructor, a teacher in various subjects. That led me to do some teaching with Gary's company. That then led me into doing some consulting for defense attorneys and prosecuting attorneys on case background, case breakdown. And then that led to Vista now has a large presence in the law enforcement background investigation field for various local law enforcement agencies in the St. Louis metropolitan area. And then little did I know I would be sitting here talking to everybody on a microphone when Gary had this brilliant idea of, this is what I want to do. I like reaching out to young people. I like reaching out to citizens, to non-law enforcement people, and bringing them into the fold, so to speak, on talking about what's current in law enforcement, what's current in crime, and where law enforcement's going in this world with the younger generation, the people wanting to become involved in it, as well as strengthening the education background of those in law enforcement in the field every day. That he approached me with becoming part of this podcast. And I thought that was a great idea. I think it's a great idea to reach out and get many people involved. So I want to thank Gary for that invitation and my continuing role with Vista Law Enforcement Training and Consulting, LLC.
Let's build on Tony's background. Tony's also a firearms instructor with handgun, shotgun, and patrol rifle. Tony's also an EVOC, that stands for Emergency Vehicle Operations Course instructor. Tony has been there for me when I've needed him to kind of kick in, and because I got kind of a busy schedule, a lot of things going on. So I thank Tony for his support at Vista, as well as agreeing to be, again, a research specialist and overall a person that's been associated with the Trend podcast. So thanks, Tony. And like I say, episode 2, we'll get into your background a little bit more. We'll talk about trends in law enforcement, both in the local and the federal aspect. And so they'll be very important to go over. So, okay. Next, we're going to talk about how to make this all work. There's such thing as called the keeper of the board, or the keeper of, how can I say it? To make everything work smoothly. And so that's where we're going to talk with Sam Garrett. Sam's going to talk about his background a little bit. He's going to talk about how he became involved with Vista law enforcement training. So Sam, go ahead and take it away.
Hi, my back is turned, so I want everybody to see me. Let's go up a little bit. I am a current college student, just like Allie and Sarah. I'm at UMSL. I am working towards a criminal justice degree. I got my transfer studies degree from STLCC, and I have an interest in working in local law enforcement. I ran into Gary the same way Allie and Larry did. I actually took a class with you before, but that was before the internship was we didn't have any interns at that time, so I wanted to take a risk, I guess, and join the internship just like Larry and Allie did. And yeah, it's been good from there. I've been networking and figuring out really what I want to do in law enforcement.
What do you want to do? What's your main focus?
I want to work locally, at least to start.
As what?
A patrolman or a sheriff's deputy, an officer or a sheriff's deputy. It's in some aspect for a department somewhere.
And you're eyeing going to police academy at some point, hopefully soon?
2026.
Good deal. And
Of course.
again, Sam, we'll talk a little bit about this a little bit more as we progress here for the trend. All right, so it's not last and least, it's the most important. Next we're going to introduce is Lieutenant.
Your wife. She is the most important.
She will be the last person I'll introduce, but she's off to the background there. But anyways, Lieutenant Brian Hilke retired. He is Vista Law Enforcement Training Consulting. Brian is the person who makes Vista Law Enforcement Training work. I did develop the company in 2011, the training aspect of Vista. Brian came on board as an instructor for me. The best decision I have made, which I have not always made the 100% best decisions. I've done pretty good though, but is bringing Brian on board. And Brian was an instructor, and Brian retired. And when I saw Brian retire, I had some things come up in my life. I couldn't devote as much time to the Vista law enforcement training aspect. And so I promoted Brian to vice president of training. Brian took the role of vice president of training. And eventually I saw myself wanting to get a little bit less and less because I'm about 20 years older than Brian. Brian had a little bit more time and resource, I guess, to devote to Vista. So was it about a year and a half you became president, Brian, or 2 years?
I think so.
Yeah. So about between a year and a half and 2 years ago, I decided to transfer the reins to Brian. Brian is now president of Vista Law Enforcement Training Consulting, LLC. Brian will be talking here a little bit about his background, how he got involved, his background in law enforcement. Again, at the second episode of the Trend podcast, we'll talk a little bit more about Brian's involvement in some cases he worked on, as well as overall views of law enforcement. Again, without Brian, Vista training would not have survived. He's been such an important bond. Brian has brought so much business training and resources, as well as knowledge to the training aspect. Vista Law Enforcement Training Consulting, LLC. Let me talk. The website is www.vistabluetraining.com, and the email is vistallc@vistabluetraining.com. When Brian's going to introduce himself, I want to talk a little bit about Vista to start. We'll get a little bit more into in the second episode about law enforcement. And so I want Brian to introduce himself. I want to cover his educational background, as well as other branch off of Vista about what he also does part of Vista. And I want him to take his time. We got plenty of time here and discuss this because, again, without Brian, Vista wouldn't be here. So go ahead, Brian, if you want to go ahead and do introduction and tell us a little bit who you are.
Well, I'll slide you a 20 later.
I'll take it.
So like you said, my name's Brian. Excuse me, I'm still dealing with a little bit of a cold. I started about 2 days after I turned 21. A little bit of a background on my history. I had a full ride to WashU. I was in their accelerated law program, and I decided it was more important to drink than to go to class, and that eventually caught up with me. So when I got that nasty letter from WashU saying you were no longer a student, my dad at the time, who is also law enforcement, he did 45 years of law enforcement, and he told me, you got 2 weeks to find a job or I'm kicking you out of the house. So we had just recently moved to a very rural area. I didn't know anybody. I didn't have any plans. And at the time, my dad was working for the sheriff's department. And I said, well, I can either go work there if you can find me a job, or I can live out of my car. So he ended up getting me a job at the sheriff's department. I started a couple days after I turned 21, and that's kind of where I got my start. I did 4 years in corrections. I ended up being the jail administrator of a 100-bed jail facility. I had about 28 employees. And then after I started getting my first gray hairs in my mid-20s, I realized that my life expectancy wasn't going to be very long if I continued working in corrections. So I figured it was time to kind of go down a different career path. And that's when I went to O'Fallon. And that's where I did almost 21 years. During my time there, I was an FTO. I was a crime scene investigator, detective. I got promoted to sergeant, went back to patrol. During that time, I was fortunate enough to get selected to be O'Fallon's first polygraph examiner, which I still do today. We'll talk hopefully a little bit more about that as we go along. And eventually went back to the detective bureau as a detective sergeant. That's where I spent most of my career. So about 11 years as a detective sergeant, got to work with amazing detectives. A lot of the cases that I'll talk about throughout the podcast would not have been solved had I not had a great team. 2019, I made the worst decision in my career. I got promoted to lieutenant. That is the worst position in any law enforcement agency, I think. Did that for about 2 years. And then, like Gary said, in 2021, I ended up retiring. And one of the best decisions I ever made was attending one of Gary's courses, probably, about 2017. And I was really excited about the type of classes Gary had. It was
What was the course? Remember the course?
It was forensic anthropology.
Yep.
And about 2 years later, Gary was hiring somebody as an instructor. I had heard that he was looking for instructors, and that's when I kind of reached out to Gary and said, hey, kind of interested in teaching. I always loved teaching, instructing, and Gary took a chance on me, and I'm very fortunate that Gary did that because over the last 6 years or so, it's been a great ride.
Well, let me talk a little bit. First, when Brian said FTO, that's a field training officer. That's the individuals who train younger officers, which being a field training officer, as Brian said, very instrumental in developing officers. Let me talk about my first meeting with Brian. I'll have him build a little bit more. So, yeah, I had hired somebody from O'Fallon Police Department to work in the firearms field as a firearms instructor. And then that's how Brian found out about the company. And plus from his first class he attended, which is a forensic anthropology. On a future podcast, we're going to have Dr. Lindsay Trammell. Dr. Trammell is a board certified forensic anthropologist. In a future podcast, you can talk about what does an anthropologist do. So, stay tuned. We'll talk about her role a little bit and how it helps law enforcement. So I first met Brian at a restaurant, even though he was in the class previously. And Brian sat across from me, and my background is homicide investigation. I'll talk a little bit about that at the last introduction part. And Brian looked like a polygraph examiner, all right? And what do they look like, all right? I've dealt with many, many polygraphs. Brian had that look at me, the stare, the analytical stare, and I could see his head tilting side to side, trying to read me a little bit, and I tried to read Brian. And so, yeah, when he said he was a polygraph examiner, it all came together. So anyways, Brian retired, and he talked about his background in polygraphs, and Brian and I discussed it, and we discussed, let's get you back into polygraphs. And so Brian and I worked together, and so we had a polygraph division within Vista. And then Brian ended up purchasing a second polygraph firm, which is also connected to Vista, but it's his own company and his son-in-law's company. So we'll talk about that a little bit in episode 2 about Brian's going there. And so with Brian being the man in charge of Vista law enforcement training, that has really grown for the training aspect of law enforcement. Again, second episode, we're going to talk about where we train, what we do. And I say I'm still involved in the company, but Brian runs it. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. All right, so last but not least, but not last, my wife, Michelle. Michelle is off the background a little bit, but Michelle is Executive Vice President of Trend Media, LLC. And Trend Media is the parent company of the Trend Podcast. I came up with the idea of Trend Media about 6 to 8 months ago. I've been writing business plans, going through it. And then Michelle agreed to join me in the venture. And she's been nothing but a support behind the scenes. And she is, again, more behind the scenes. And she's executive vice president. She will handle a lot of coordinating with Allie, Sarah for the production, as well as Larry and Tony for the research. So again, I wouldn't be here in numerous aspects of my life without Michelle's support. And the latest one being is her support to make this workforce all for the podcast. So I can't thank her enough. Again, she's more behind the scenes, but she works just as hard as everybody else. So let me talk about myself a little bit how this started. With me backing off from working at Vista as much, with Brian taking over presidency, I thought, what did I want to do in my last part of my working career? I want to do something that would be, how can I say it, still supporting the law enforcement field, but not having to go out there and get up at 5 or 6 in the morning, going out to different locations in the state of Missouri and do training while I'm still doing that. So I thought about what else could I do? So I thought about doing a podcast and creating my own media company. And I came up with the name late one night in bed, just sleeping. I says, Trend, everything trends. So I came up with Trend Media. It is a limited liability company, and it is the parent company. And then after Trend Media, I knew in my mind I wanted to do a podcast. So I started thinking about becoming involved in podcasting. I wasn't too familiar, so I did a lot of legal research, a lot of research how these work. I also did a lot of research about what can they do, what are the topics. And I had to talk about something I was familiar with, something I can share. So I came up with 3 basic areas. First is true crime. The true crime aspect is going to discuss, like I said, current open cases, closed cases that have been solved, and then cold cases. The producers will come up with the topics along with me. It'll be Larry and Tony that are going to be research specialists looking at the topics. Time to time, everybody will participate. This is the largest podcast we're going to have with everybody at one time. And then time to time, we'll have everybody here. I will never do the podcast by myself. We're going to have guests come in, or one of the other people that are producers or technical or research people involved in the podcast talk about that too. So why true crime? My background is as a homicide detective. I served 30 years on the St. Louis County Police Department, and half of my career was in the homicide unit. Back then, and still is, called the Crimes Against Persons, which handles homicides, robberies, and sexual assault. We're all trained to do all 3. My main focus were sexual assault investigations, which I was doing along with some robbery cases. And then I transitioned to the homicide work. First homicide scene that I really was involved with, I was not the lead detective, was in 1986. Things have changed since 1986 about the investigative aspects of homicide and death investigations. And up until the day I retired, which was in 2009, things have changed. The investigation of homicides have changed. The investigation of deaths have changed. And again, the second episode, we're going to talk a little bit about the death investigation aspect of law enforcement, different units that works. 30 years, St. Louis County Police, like I say, homicide detective for half of my career. I was also a police academy instructor for 4 years. That's where I became really interested in training. And that's how I developed VISTA law enforcement training from my time being a law enforcement full-time police academy instructor at the St. Louis County and Municipal Police Academy. And then I was a burglary detective for about 3 years, which is where I began my career in investigations, which I really loved. I was a uniformed patrol officer for 3 years. And based upon my time, I always wanted a new challenge. So one of the challenges I took in 1999 is I was asked and I was sent and I was delivered to the Drug Enforcement Administration. So I worked for the DEA as a federal task force officer for a little over 7 years. During that time, my career started in the intelligence unit, which was tactical intelligence. Two types of intelligence: strategic intelligence and tactical. Strategic intelligence is more information gathering. It's more putting pieces together for intelligence. And then I was in tactical, which is actually gathering the intelligence, going out in the field and developing intelligence. So I was in tactical intelligence for a number of years. And then September 11, 2001, everything changed in law enforcement. And in 2001, with the attacks that happened, and Tony's going to talk a little bit about that, about how he was involved in investigations of September 11th in our second episode. They decided to, DEA went to the aspects of tracing the drug money that was made by drug trafficking organizations, or DTOs. And then I was transferred, I ended up working what was called the Financial Crimes Unit, or the Money Laundering Group. And I did my last part of my time and career at DEA was work in money laundering and financial crimes. I had a good time doing it. We did a lot of undercover operations. I'll talk about some of the federal investigations that have been solved, and they are allowed for public discussion about what we did there. So anyways, I'll talk about all aspects of that as we progress a little bit more. But I had a really interesting career. I hold a certificate of specialization in business administration. I got a double bachelor's degree in management and business administration and master's degree in business. I'm only saying that because I have a little bit of a business business knowledge. I was able to create my own businesses, and I was able to learn a lot. And working for the DEA and the money laundering and the financial crimes, it taught me a lot about the environment and about how things work. And so that's how the last topic of trend became about. We're going to talk about trends in the economy, regional trends. We'll talk about businesses, what's going on within the business environment, what's happening in our economy, like the elections just came up. Things are going to change with the change in the leadership of the country, and also different aspects in the St. Louis region. And so that'll be the last, the third part we'll talk about as far as the podcast, the trend podcast topics. And again, we'll have guests that come in and cover that. Very fortunate to have the career I did, very lucky. So I got about a total of 45 years in law enforcement. The best thing that I've learned about law enforcement is meeting the people along the way. All right. And the people around this table, and Michelle off to the side, you guys have done so much to enlighten my life. You've made everything so much better for me in some difficult times sometimes. So I can't thank you enough for a couple of things. First is meeting you, number one. I met everybody at different times in my life that were the most important. Second, I'm currently college professor for St. Louis Community College District, where I teach at every campus, which is Forest Park, Merrimack, Wildwood, and Florissant Valley. My main focus is criminology and criminal justice. I've been a college professor for about 7 years now. I've met so many great people along the way. And like when I hired Brian, hiring Sam, Sarah, and Larry was the best decision I made for the intern program. All right. And they have been with us from the start, us meaning Brian and I. And Larry started off as intern coordinator. He developed and mentored the new interns. And then everybody came into their own being. So everybody now are coordinators for the company. Sarah, again, is the business coordinator. And that's where we're at today. So again, everybody's done their part. Tony, I've known Tony for when he was a uniformed police officer. Kind of lost touch when Tony went to the ATF. We still saw each other occasionally, but it was at a going away party for retirement for one of lieutenants. I saw Tony. And
I was just going to add, I used to always see Gary running on Mexico Road. He was a marathoner. He competed in many Ironmen. So I'd always see him out there running, and it'd be like, hey, I know that guy. I know he runs Ironman.
Yeah, and so, yeah, he did seem fun. He didn't beat the horn and scare me like a lot of people do. So anyway, so yeah, and so met Tony at a retirement party. And then I also, part of my job, I worked for the Fraternal Order of Police, FOP Lodge 111, for St. Louis County Police. And I also help all law enforcement people, civilian and commissioned, with their retirement. So Tony knew I did that. So Tony got a hold of me, and Tony's getting ready to retire. So we worked on Tony a little bit for his retirement stuff. And so from then on out, Tony and I have maintained a very close friendship. We play golf together, work together, laugh together, smoke cigars together. So that's it's all a sport in itself. So I can't thank everybody enough. You'll hear more about our backgrounds and careers as we progress. Brian didn't talk about his education. Brian holds a bachelor's degree from Columbia College in sociology and criminal justice, and he holds a master's degree from Lincoln University in the same criminology and sociology. And so Brian, his education has brought him along, but it's also the life experiences, right?
Absolutely.
We learn along the way. So again, as the episodes progress, we'll have individuals from the Trend Podcast involved and Trend Media as guests occasionally, but we'll also have people coming in from the outside. We have numerous topics and numerous podcasts already scheduled about different people we're going to have present. And at the end of every podcast, we'll talk about the upcoming episodes. So our website, www.trendmediallc.com, will list all of the upcoming episodes. We'll post one episode a week. You can listen to the Trend Podcast through different social media platforms, which Sarah will talk about as things progress here, as we go a little bit further in. Again, this is the Trend Podcast, which is part of Trend Media, LLC, based in Wentzville, Missouri. And we're here to support law enforcement, the business environment, and the overall citizens of our communities. Thanks, everyone, for tuning into this episode of The Trend. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, please feel free to reach out to us at the Trend's website at www.trendmediallc.com, or you can email us at any time at thetrend@trendmediallc.com. We welcome everybody's comments, suggestions, or reviews. Don't forget to stay connected with us on social media. Follow us on TikTok and Instagram at Trend Media Podcast, and join the conversation on Facebook by searching the Trend Podcast. Check out our Amazon page through the link on our website, where you'll find some of our recommended products. If you've enjoyed this episode, consider supporting us by donating $5 to our Venmo account at the Trend Podcast. Every little bit helps. Thank you so much for donating. If you're interested in doing so, we really appreciate it. We'll be back next time with more true crime stories, insights on law enforcement trends, and current trends with our region and the people we serve. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and stay part of the Trend.